And welcome to week 6, day 5. We're going to have our JavaScript review. I want to cover basically everything we covered this week, and I'm going to do that by going through this week's assignments and just kind of running through them and explaining how I would maybe approach some of this stuff. Maybe it'll help clear up any questions or issues you were running into while working on these assignments. I haven't seen any questions coming through the Slack or anything, so I'm assuming that it might be going well, but just in case anyone's feeling a little reluctant, I'm just going to go ahead and run through some of this stuff. I actually created a GitHub organization here so that I can make new repos without putting my groups on blast. So I'll start off exactly the way we would do this, as if we were running through this like normal. So for this assignment, I'm going to copy this name here. We're going to create a new repository. I'm going to create this repository called JavaScript Logic DOM. We'll do a public repository, and I'm going to include a README so that I can clone this. And again, this is the week 6, day 1 assignment that I'm just kind of run through here. I'm going to grab my little link here so I can clone this. And I created a new folder. This is going to be my projects folder. This is where all of my projects are going to exist. So this is where I'm going to clone it to. Open git bash here. And I'll just do my git clone, shift insert to paste that. That's the Windows thing. Sometimes you have to use shift insert for paste. And I'm going to run that through. Okay, so there's the folder. I'm going to cd into it. And code space period to open VS Code. And let's get started. We're going to create an index.html and a script.js. So that's going to be the same on every assignment this week. It's always going to be the same file structure. And I just want to get my proof of life before I do anything else. And then in the body, I'll put my script. I always mess up the import on this. And I'll put just a little bit of content here, just so we can see that it's working on the page. Okay, that seems to be looking good. We did this part. We have an index.html script. In the index, we're going to create a div with a unique ID that's going to serve as a container for our dynamic output. So go to the step next. And we'll create a div. And we'll give it an ID of content will work. You can call these IDs whatever you want unless it specifies otherwise. And we're going to add a text field, input field, a text input field, and a button to facilitate user interaction. I'm going to put this underneath of the content div. I'll place it here. Whenever you have an input field, you always need to have a label. So I'll put the label in first. And this is going to be for my user input. And under the label, I'll put an input here. And this is user input. And the ID will be user input as well. And let's see our output on that. Okay, looks good. I click on this button. It looks like it's all wired up correctly. So that is all working correctly now. Let's see the instructions for the next step. In the script.js, write code to create new paragraph elements and append them to the container with dynamic content based on user input and logic. So there's a few ways to approach this. I know that I'm going to be having stuff happen whenever I click on the button. So I definitely want to make this into a function. So let's start with that. I will create a new function. And this is basically just going to handle all of the output messages. So I'm actually going to call this function display output, and it's going to take in a string. So I'll put in message there as my parameter. And we want to create a paragraph element. And this is going to equal document.create element. And we're going to pass in the paragraph element so that it knows which element to create. It does match my variable name, but it doesn't have to match the variable name. I just choose to do that. And then for the content of the message, it's going to be key dot. I'm going to use text content. I've been using inner text. I just want to remind you that we also have this property available. And I'm going to assign this to the parameter coming into the function message. So whenever I invoke this message, or whenever I invoke this function, that's when the message will be generated. We don't know what it's going to be until we actually call the function. So if I wanted to, I could invoke this function now in my what do they call that? Display output. And we know it takes in a string. And I forgot to append this actually. So let me add that last bit there. Before I can append it, I actually need to select my container. So I called my div content. So let me go ahead and grab that. I'll call this variable message area because it is representing the area that all the messages will appear. And I'm going to use query selector with hashtag content was the name of the ID. And I can see that right here. I'm using the same ID as this here. So now that we have the message area selected, I did this in global scope in case I need it somewhere else as well. Now that it's selected, I'm going to go ahead and append child message area dot append child, and we're going to pass in the P element. Let's try that again. And there we go. We get our output there that says hello. So the function is working correctly. Let's take a look at the next step. Implement function that triggers when the button is clicked. Use comparison operators. So I need to put a button in there. I forgot to do that part. And I'm just going to make this kind of like a little guess the number game. That's pretty simple, and it'll work for what we're doing here. So let's put in my button first. And I'm just going to query select that button. And it's just an element. I don't have a class name. I don't have an ID. So I'm just going to pass in the element name to actually select the button. Now that it's selected, I'm going to add an event listener. And we are going to pass in the event click as the first parameter. And we want a callback function for our second parameter. So I'm going to put a comma. The comma tells me that I'm going to have two parameters. And then I'm going to use the classic function declaration here just to remind you that you can do this instead of the arrow function. And it looks like this. We have the function keyword. We have our parameter block. We do not have a function name because this is an anonymous function. And then I'm going to make this multiple lines. Again, I could do this as an arrow function. It would work the same. And when I click on the button, what I want to do at that time is whatever is in my input, I want to place in this function invocation as an argument. So I actually need to select my input as well. Notice I'm putting all my variables at the top of the page. This is a very common practice. So my input element will be document dot query selector, and I gave this an ID. Let me check that ID. It is called user-input. So I'll put user-input here. We are selecting the ID for user input. So now I have access to the element, which means I have access to its value. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to console.log. to make sure this is working correctly, input element.value. And then I'm going to type in my input area and I'm going to click on the button. And it seems to be working correctly. I do have the output of my input area. I'm going to give this a little bit of text. I don't like that little tiny button there. I want a little bit of content in my button. We'll just say submit. That looks a little better. So now that I have the access to the value, what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to call the function display output, and I'm going to pass in my input element dot value as the parameter. And this will be the string that's available inside of that area. So if I type something in here, we see that come up top. For the next part of this assignment, though, it says to use these comparison operators. So I need to make something that's actually checking against in order to make this complete. So again, I said I was going to use a guess a number game. So to do that, what I want to do is have conditional inputs here. So first thing I want to check, if input element dot value is, first thing I want to determine, I guess, is what my number is going to be. I'm just going to go with 12 as my number. So if the value is strictly equal to 12, then that's where we're going to put the actual output here. And I'm also going to put another message with this. I'll say display output, and I'm just going to put a string here and say you are correct. Actually, I'm going to do this as, I could do this as one and concatenate it. I'll just say, yeah, this is fine. I'll have you are correct if it's correct. Else if, I forgot my conditional here. Else if input element dot value is less than 12, then I will say, I'll do both of these again, but I'll have them a separate message. And we'll say higher. And then we'll do the same thing for lower, but we actually don't need to put any logic in because it's the only condition left that we could possibly check for. If it's not less than 12 and it's not equal to 12, then it has to be greater than 12, unless it's not a number. So I'll show that condition and I'll show you what I mean. And that's something we can also check for if we wanted to. I could also just use an if, else if, and then another else. Perhaps I'll do it this way first, and then I'll show you what I'm talking about. So display output, and we'll say lower. And I'll show you that little bit of a bug. So if we put 3 in here, we get higher. If we put 14 in here, we get lower. If I put G in here, I get lower. So that's the bug I'm talking about. It shouldn't accept letters. So what we can do, instead of using this else right here, we can make this an else if, and we'll just steal this logic from in here and reverse it. If it's greater than 12, say lower, and then we can do our else and say invalid input. And guess a number, something like that. So we'll check it again. 2 says higher, 22 says lower, G says invalid input, guess a number. So that's all that is needed for this assignment. If we look back at the instructions here, display the results as text inside in the DOM. Everything there looks good. So the last thing we need to do is ACP and submit. So to ACP, we're going to do that through the terminal. I'm already inside of the correct spot in my terminal. If you didn't have your terminal open anymore, you could always open that back up. Yes, Ryan, what's your question?
I was just going to ask if you could like slide the terminal window over so that the code is still readable.
Yeah, so what I'm actually going to do is open my terminal up in VS Code. And I'll put it on the right side so that it is readable. That was open it all the way. I think maybe I right click to do that. No. Panel position right, like that. And then I also want to switch this to Git Bash. Currently my default terminal is set to PowerShell. So we'll switch that over to Git Bash. And now I'm in the correct directory again. And I'm just going to say git add period. Again, you don't have to do it this way. You can use your terminal the way you've been using it by opening your Git Bash, CDing into it, or opening up your folder, right click in the folder, right click and open Git Bash here. This all works the same. I just wanted to show you that you can do this through VS Code as well. I know some of you have to do it in VS Code, but again, I just did my git add to add my files. And we can see over here, my tracker showing they're added to staging. So we'll do git commit -m, and we will say add function for creating paragraphs. That'll work for now. I'll send that, and then we'll do a git push origin main. And then I would simply go to GitHub and grab that link for submission. So that is day 1 of week 6 lab. I'm going to do the same thing for the rest of them, just so we get a good review this week. It also will give you a way to catch up if you fell behind on this JavaScript week. We will have more ample time to catch up on assignments if you are behind. So go ahead and take advantage of that. For now, let me close this out. This one is done. I'm going to go to the next assignment. And just open it up this way. So here is day 2. This is the looping assignment. So let's go to VS Code. I'm going to create a new repository. And I'm going to select my Codex demos. I'm using this this organization just so I don't spam my own repos with this. Make this a repo, a public repo, add a README, and let's see what they want us to call it. Create a new repository called JavaScript loops. Be careful not to grab that period. JavaScript loops public, and we're adding the README, so everything here is good. We'll go ahead and create that. And then I'm going to clone this down. So I'm going to go back to my folder. I'll back it up 1 level. I don't want to clone it in here because I already have a .git folder there. That would cause a major conflict. We don't want to have that. But I do not have a Git folder here. This is going to be my project directory. So we'll open Git Bash here and use git clone, shift insert, enter. And there it created my JavaScript loops folder. CD JavaScript loops. And code space period to open VS Code. And now I will create an index.html and a script.js. And within my index, I'm going to create my starter stuff. This is week 6, day 2. We're going to add content for proof of life. And I'll add in my script. Use strict. And I'll just throw console.log in here just to make sure this is working. So we go live. Okay, there's our content. There's our console.log. So everything here seems to be working. So let's see what we got to do first. We created our index on our script. We're going to create an array of at least 5 elements in JavaScript. So I'll start with that. To create an array, I'm going to use const, and I'll call this my array equals array template literal with the square brackets and 5 items. Does it specify what they need to be? It does not. So I'm going to use strings. Okay, there's our 5 items. And use a for loop to iterate over the array and log each element to the console. So each element is referring to each string within our array. So in order to loop over this and add each item to the console, I'm going to declare a for loop. I'll say for let I equal 0, semicolon. We declare our initializer starting at 0, I less than my array dot length, semicolon, I plus plus. This is going to increase our iteration as this loops. We're starting at 0, and then we know this is going to loop 5 times because this is going to be true for 5 iterations. Remember, this does result as a Boolean because we are using a comparison operator here. Okay, so we just need to log these to the console. So I'll say console.log. My array, we'll put in the index notation of I. I'm using I because every iteration, this is going to be increasing numerically. It's going to start at 0. So it'll say first iteration, my array at 0. Second iteration, my array at 1. Third iteration, my array at 2, until it reaches the end of the array where it would be, I would be equal to 4 at that time. So let's go ahead and look at the result. And there we have item 1 through 5 being put out to the console. We can see each of those consoles are on the same line because this loop is working correctly. Let's take a look at the next step. We're going to use a for loop to generate and log a sequence. So we want to do numbers 1 through 10 to the console. I could do 0 through 9. That's kind of boring. I want to increase it by 1 so that it shows that 1 through 10. So we'll do our normal for loop declaration for let I equal 0. If I is less than 10, put a semicolon to separate our statements. I plus plus. We'll put in our curly brackets, and then we will say console.log I plus 1. And this is because it says less than 10. It's only going to get us 1 through 9. So let's take a look at that. Oops, so, no, it did give us 10. If I is less than 10, because we're starting at 0. You're right. So it will give us all 10. And then we're just doing I plus 1. So 0 through 9, that's 10 values. I plus 1 gives us 1 through 10. So that is working correctly. And the next part is implement a while loop that executes as long as a certain condition is true. That's pretty much the definition of a while loop. So as long as you implement a while loop that ends at some point and doesn't just not run at all, then you'll be able to complete this part of the assignment. Demonstrate a practical scenario where a while loop is preferable over a for loop. This isn't really in the definition of a while loop. This is where I would do something like checking to make sure something is correct before ending the loop. The best example for this is using the prompt function and making sure that something is correct as it loops. So I'm going to do while true. Sorry, I'm actually going to make this a variable. I want to say while, we'll put the variable above, let user reply. I'm just going to initialize this to undefined so that it exists. and we'll say while user reply is not strictly equal to hello with a capital H, then this loop will run forever. So then we will say assign user reply to the prompt function, passing in the string, what is the password? And this will run forever until the user submits hello. And I don't see any bugs, so this should run unless I'm already in an infinite loop, which I am. So let me restart. What is the password? HELLO. Refresh. Put in some random text. HELLO. Okay. Something to note when you're using the prompt function, notice that when I refresh, I don't get my content on the page. This pops up before that happens. There is a way to make it so it doesn't do that. And I just want to show this real quick. It's kind of a little side note with this. This is called the set timeout. So what we can do is say set timeout. This is going to put a delay on it. And for the first part of the timeout, we're going to put a function, callback function. So I'm actually going to write the word function here. I could use an arrow function. It would work just the same. So the first parameter is a callback function. And the second parameter is the amount of delay we want to put. I'll put 500 there. And then I'm just going to place this inside of that function and then format. Let's take a look at that. Let me do a refresh. And it seems that I broke it. I believe it's because my while loop isn't inside of a function. So what I'm going to actually do is re-demonstrate this before my browser crashes. So I need to close this tab. Okay, I'm going to redo this with a function that'll be invoked at the delayed time. So I'll say function. I need to give this function a name. We'll call it main. You'd also call this like initializer or something. And the main function will be invoked at a later time. So I'm just going to put my while loop inside of it. And then we'll do set timeout. We'll pass in main, and we'll pass in the amount of time. And that should give us enough delay that it can load the content first. Let's do a refresh. And there we go. We got our content, and then we got our pop-up. So let's see that again. Refresh, content's on the page, and then we get our pop-up. So a little bit useful thing when you're using prompts. Put them in a set timeout like this. Keep in mind when you're using a while loop, you'll need to make sure you have a function to encapsulate your loop. Otherwise, it won't work correctly. It'll run the while loop, and the while loop will get confused. It'll never break, and your set timeout will never get an opportunity to run. So that's why it didn't work the first time. You have to make sure you encapsulate it within a function like that. Okay, so now that we're out of that rabbit hole, let's take a look at the next step. Create a nested loop structure to solve a complex problem, such as generating a multiplication table. Log out the output of the nested loops to the console. What this is referring to is basically indexing through a matrix. We could do this generating a multiplication table. It's a little bit more advanced than I like to get into. So I'm just going to create an array of arrays. And I'm going to call this matrix equals. And we're going to put in an array of arrays. So we'll do this. We'll do this a 3 by 3. there's our 3. And then we'll put some content into each of these. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so we have an array of arrays. Each inner array contains one item. So now we're going to do for let I equal 0. If I is less than matrix dot length, then we will do I plus plus. And now we need an inner loop because we're going to be accessing this array, which only contains one item, so this isn't that bad. I could make this a little bit more complex by doing something like this. Oops. That'll give it a little bit better of a demonstration on what it's actually doing. In fact, I'm actually going to make this a lot shorter. That's a lot of values. There we go. That'll work. So we have our 3 by 3 by 3. Now, inside of here, I'm going to create a second for loop. And this one's going to be using J. We're going to initialize that to 0, our semicolon to separate this part of the statement. And we are not, we don't want to know the length of the matrix. We want to know the length of the inner array. So this is the part we're actually trying to check now, the length of. We want to, because this loop isn't looping this outer array. See the blue square brackets here? It's representing an array with 3 items. And these are the 3 items, these 3 arrays. That's what this array length is tracking. We want to track the length of the inner array. It just so happens that it is the same length. So if you were to use matrix dot length, it would work technically. But if we were to have another item in here, this would no longer work. And I'm actually going to leave that extra item in there just for that. What did I break? Oh, it's my loop. Okay. So now I'm going to do matrix at I, which represents whatever loop we're on or whatever index we're on. It'll grab that specific array. We want to know that array dot length, and then we will increment J. Now my prettier should be happy. Yep. So we have 4 items in each of these arrays. And I did that again just to show you, because you have to select this inside array instead of this outer array. So the outer array has 3, the inner array has 4. So that is an important distinction here. And that's why we're using matrix at I. I is going to start at 0 as the outer loop runs. When I is at 0, we're on this one. And then when J is at 0, J is going to be looking at this. Then J is going to look at this. J is going to look at this. J is going to look at that. I would increment to 2. So then we're looking at this one. And then J is going to look at this. J is going to look at this. J is going to look at this. J is going to look at that. I is going to increment again. It's going to see that the matrix no longer has any arrays, and it's going to end the our outer loop. Okay, so let's go ahead and console.log. The matrix at I, the matrix at J. And the reason I'm doing I is because I want to select whatever element we're currently working on, but I also want to select the inner element as we loop through the inner array. So this I isn't changing as this J increments. This I is going to remain static until this J loop is completely finished running. I will remain the same. J will increment all the way to the end. And then this loop will complete running. And then this one will increment by 1. And that's when my J loop will begin running again. The next time J runs, this will be incremented to 1. My J is going to go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or sorry, 0, 1, 2, 3. And then this inner loop is going to stop running. We're going to go back to the outer loop. The outer loop's going to be incremented to 2. And then our inner loop is going to go, I is going to remain at 2. It's not going to continue to increment. J is going to go 0, 1, 2, 3. And then this entire thing is going to be done running because we're now out of our matrix length. Now let's make sure this is working correctly on our console. The password is hello. And let me do an inspect. Oh, it came up. I pressed it twice. And it seems that we have an issue. Let me comment these out first. We need to debug to make sure it's not my while loop that's throwing the issue. Okay, so it isn't the while loop. I am going to turn this one off temporarily, just so we don't have that coming up. Refresh, everything looks good. Let me turn this back on and see where we went wrong here. Ah, I see it. So we have matrix.length, but I never did J less than matrix.length. So this was just a static value. It wasn't a Boolean, so the for loop wasn't working correctly. Let's do a refresh. If it'll let me hit the cancel button, it's not going to let me, so I'm going to hit close on this browser tab. Hopefully I can get this before the browser crashes. Yep, we got it. Control Shift I. And we're seeing script line 10, script line 29. Where's line 10? 10's up here. Let me comment this one out for the moment. Refresh. Here's our script line 29. I'm going to put a little bit of a string in here too, just so we can make sure that this is what we expect. So I'm going to actually put some information in here. So let me wrap this in a template literal. And what we want to know is current index of matrix array. And that's going to be $ curly brackets I. We'll do a new line here. Current index of inner array, $ curly brackets, and this is J. So let's take a look at that console output now. So here we can see the current index of the matrix array is 0. Current index of the inner array is 0, and we get 1. Current index of the matrix array is still 0. Our inner array incremented by 1, we get 2. We still haven't incremented our matrix. Our current index of our inner array is 2, and that has a value of 3. And now we can see that our current inner array incremented to 3, and we get a value of 4. Again, we still haven't incremented our matrix. The inner array at this time would end. At the end of the inner array, we will then index or increase our matrix array. So I just wanted to show you kind of how that's all working. This is what we mainly were trying to solve with the assignment, was just doing something with a nested array. It didn't have to be anything particular. I'm not doing any math with any of these. If I wanted to, I could say something like times 10. And now we have different values. So there, if you wanted to do a little math, you can do that inside of your console.log. But that's all that we have for this assignment. That says, oh, yeah, we did the complex problem. We're logging out the output of the nested loop. So this one is complete. So I'm going to ACP this. And just to remind you that you can do this, I'm going to ACP it using VS Code without the terminal. So I'm going to click on my source control on the left. And we see our changes here. I'm going to add my changes to staging. This one's still changed. And then I'm going to type in my commit message. And press commit. And then I'm going to press this to push. And there's the full ACP process, only using VS Code. If you want to use this, feel free to do it. Just try not to get too rusty with the terminal, because there are times where you have to use the terminal for your ACP process, especially if you get into an environment where you're coding remotely, using a platform as a service for your coding environment. Okay, so that's it for this one. Let me close this out, and we will get into the next assignment. So this would be day 3. We're going to create a new repository called callback array methods. So let me open that up. New repository. Let me select my organization. Go public, add a README, create repository. Let me clone this down. And as I clone this down, I'll be able to actually create my files using the terminal if I want to. So I'm going to do that this time. I haven't demonstrated that in a while. We'll do git clone, shift insert, and then we'll cd into that. That was the callback one. And then I'll do touch index.html and script.js. And then I will code, period, open my VS Code there. We can see my files were already created. I didn't put any content in them though, so let me do that now. And I'll put in some content, put in a script. Use strict. And I'll just throw a random console.log in here, make sure our proof of life is working, and go live. Well, excuse me. Let's see, there's our inspect. There's that RO I put in there. So this is all wired up correctly. Let's see what our first step is. So implement or create an array of numbers, and then we're going to use the map method with a callback function to modify each element. So let's go ahead and implement that. First, I'll start with the array. We'll do const my array equals 2, 3, 4, 5. Does it have a maximum number? It doesn't say, just an array of numbers. And then we want to call the map method on that. So the map method creates a new array. So I'm going to store this into a variable. And we'll do my array dot map. And I always use an arrow function for my map method. So I'm going to put in parentheses. I'll just call this num. It's a parameter for a function. So you could call it whatever you want. Remember, these callback functions are functions and parameters are variables. So those can be whatever you want them to be called. We don't have an actual function name again because this is an anonymous function. But there's our parameter. And I'm just going to return num times 2. The reason I'm using the return keyword is because I put curly brackets here. If I didn't have the curly brackets, I could do all this on one line without the return statement. But I'm just going to throw the return statement in just to show you. Maybe you wanted to do some other logic, maybe a console.log here for some reason, and have your num be output. And then we'll just console.log changed nums. And let's take a look at our output. So there is the nums that are inside of our map method. And here is the changed nums array. Let me put a label on each of these. Put a comma, a string, original number. in the new nums array. There we go. So there's our new nums array, and there's the original number that was being multiplied by. Okay, let's take a look now. Use the filter method with a callback function to filter elements of the array, such as keep only even numbers. So we're going to use the filter method here. And so I'm going to say const. We'll do odds equal. This would be the changed nums of the array. I'm going to go with the original array because it's 1 through 5. We'll do my array dot filter, and then we're going to invoke this method and pass in our callback function as a parameter. So we'll put in the anonymous arrow function. I'm going to call this element this time just because I can. And I'm going to do an implicit return. I'm not going to put curly brackets, so I don't need to use the return keyword. But what I do need here is we can actually see it says expression expected. More specifically, I need something that's going to result in a Boolean. So I need a comparison operator. So I'm going to say if my element, which is my number, if I can spell element, if my element, if we divide that by 2, where's my modulo? Mod 2, if that is not strictly equal to 0, then we want that to be returned as an odd number. Let's make sure this is working correctly. And here's our odd numbers from our array. So filter is working well. And finally, we want to utilize for each method to iterate over the array and perform an action to the element and log each element to the console. So remember, for each doesn't return any values. It's used exactly like a for loop. For loops don't return anything, and for each doesn't return anything. For each is just an easier way to do a for loop. So we're going to say my array for each. Notice I'm not assigning this to a variable because that variable would only be assigned to undefined if I did. And this requires a callback function again. So we're going to use another arrow function. And for our parameter of our arrow function, I want to put in item this time just to show you each of these could be called exactly the same thing, but I'm calling them something different in every single callback function. I just want to make it really, really clear because this is always a point of confusion with callback functions. This parameter can literally be called whatever you want. It just represents the actual element that you're iterating over. So let's do something to it. Because this doesn't return anything, I'm going to use curly brackets. And we'll do a console.log. Here's our item. I'm going to do squared 2 plus 1. That's good enough. And we're doing some weird math there to it. So let's take a look at it. And there's each one squared plus 2 plus 1. So plus 3. So each one squared plus 3. Okay, that seems to be working well. Actually make this parentheses, so this is plus 3. There we go. Now it's cubed. It's good enough. It's working. I met the requirement. We used the for each, and that's it for this assignment. We just had to use the map method, the filter method, and the for each method. So hopefully that's some good review on callback functions, how to pass a callback function into an array method. And also just to remind you, anytime you're using array methods, open up MDN and remind yourself what the rules are for those array methods. So for map, we have array.prototype.map. That's the one we want. Because remember, map method lives on the prototype of the array. So we can see here they have some syntax example for us. They're using X as their parameter. It's an arrow function, and they're using an implicit return without the return keyword. And we can see that it's creating a new array. This is what I like to look at here. What are my parameters? I can see that it takes in a callback function. Anytime you see this arg, it basically means that you can add optional arguments. It's not something I've ever used myself, but it is a thing, and even says optional here. So these are the 3 parameters of the callback function. The first parameter element, this is the one I called item, I called it nums, and I called it element. This is the actual element that's being processed in the array. I just read that from right there. What that means is if you were to index the array at I in a regular for loop, that would be the element. The index is the current index you're working on. So if you're on the first element, you're at index 0. This is your second parameter of the callback function. And the third parameter, I never covered this, but there is a third parameter, and it is actually the array of the original, what you're mapping over. So you have 2 ways to access your array. And I'll just show that real quick what I mean. On the map here, it's actually on all 3 of these. We could do I for index, and then we could do ARR for array. You can call these whatever you want. What matters is their positioning. So if you didn't need this access to this index, but you did need access to this array for some reason, you could just skip that. I've seen some people that put an underscore. That means they're skipping this parameter. It doesn't really matter. You can just put the I in there, and everyone will know that that's the index. And then you could do something like console.log or at I. And it's almost like you're in a classic for loop now, because it's going to be iterating over this array, and it's going to be using the index. So it's just one of those little things. Maybe it comes in handy one day. So kind of keep it in the back of your mind, and always check MDM and just remind yourself. Return value is a really important thing to find on here. It returns a new array with each element being the result of the callback function. So that's important. And that's it for that assignment. So let me go ahead and ACP this again. I'm going to use the terminal again for the ACP. I'll open a new terminal. I'm going to move this to the right. And I'm going to open up git bash. And we'll say git add period, git commit -m, perform different array methods. Git push origin main. And then I would just grab that link and submit. This one is complete, so I'm going to go ahead and close that. And we can move on to day 4. All right, day 4. We're creating a repository named Advanced DOM Manipulation. So let's do that now. I'm going to put this on Codex Demos, public, and add a README. Let me clone this down. Git clone, shift insert, CD. Press the letter A, press tab for autocomplete, and we'll CD into that folder. And then I'll do touch index.html and script.js and code period to open that in VS Code. Add my starter code. Day, week 6, day 4. Content, And we'll do a script, src, script.js, and use strict. Put in my console.log and go live. We got our hello showing up. So let's see what the first step of this one is. So we're going to start off with building out our index.html. We need a div with an ID of main container. So we'll start there. And then we need to add 3 button elements with these IDs, btn1, btn2, and btn3. So we will do button with btn1. I'll give it a little bit of content. I'm just going to copy these and then alter them. Okay, so there's our 3 buttons and an empty UL with an ID of list container. I'm going to put this inside of my main container. ID of list container. And we're going to use get element by ID to select the main container and list container. Okay. So we'll do a const main container equals document dot get element by ID. And that ID is main container. I like to copy and paste these in so that I don't accidentally mess that up. And const, what did they call that? List container. And the ID was list container also. Okay, so I got those done. Next, use query selector all to select all buttons. So this one here was kind of designed to throw you off because you see these IDs and you know that when you select something by ID, you can't use query selector all. So it was just kind of get you think out of the box here a little bit. But what these do have in common is they all have the same element name. And there's only those buttons on the page, so we can actually just do const buttons equals document dot query selector all, and then pass in buttons. And I'm just going to console.log them to make sure this is working correctly. There we go. I have an empty node list, so I did not find the buttons. That's because I put an S at the end of it. There we go. So that's a good thing to do if you're not sure what's happening. That one little typo could have really made my day rough because now this is an empty node list just because I had an S at the end of that. I removed the S, and now we can see my node list has 3 button elements in it. And we'll be able to use indexing to select each one. Okay, so let's go ahead and select the first button. The first button will add a new LI to the list container with the text new item. So we need to put an event listener on button 1. And when we have the event listener inside of the event handler, we want to create an LI and we want to append that to the UL. So let's do that. I'll do buttons at 0 dot add event listener. And this is going to be a click event, and it's going to receive a callback function as the second parameter. And then we want to create an LI. So I'll do const LI equals document dot create element. And we'll just pass in the LI here. And we already have the list container selected up here, so we'll be able to append to that well enough. We need to add our content. Inner text equals, and what did we have to call that now? New item with a capital I. Okay, so this will create that, but it's not appending anything yet. So let's go ahead and append that to the list container dot append child, and we're going to pass in the LI. Oh, I made my mouse really slow. There we go. Let's try it out, make sure it's working. There's our new item. Seems to be working well. So the next step is button 2 is clicked, change the text of all the LI items to updated items. So I want to do that inside of my event listener. I want to select all of my LIs at that time. I have the UL selected here, but I don't have all the LIs selected. So I'm going to do that here. Buttons at 1 to get the second one. Add event listener. We're going to pass in a click. We're going to pass in a callback function. And within the second parameter, this callback function, I want to grab all of my LIs. So const, and the reason I'm doing it inside of the event listener is because I want to grab them every single time I click this button, because maybe we created a new one in between clicks. So we will call this all LIs. All LI, list of LI. Not sure what to call the variable, but I guess that'll work. We're going to use document dot query selector all, and we're just going to pass in LI. That'll select every LI on the page, and then we want to update that text. So it'll be, we'll actually have to loop over this to do this. So we'll do list of LI. Oop, I was about to do a for each. I don't like using for each when I'm dealing with the DOM. I've ran into some issues with that in the past, so I just avoid that now. You could try it. If it works for you, that's great. Just not a fan of it anymore. Let I equals 0. If I is less than the list of li dot length, semicolon, then we're going to increment to the next element. Then we just want to do list of li at I dot enter text. The reason I'm selecting this index of I is because, remember, this is like an array, and each element is going to be, it's going to be 0 the first time, and it's going to be 1, and it's going to be 2, and never how many elements I have, it'll increment to all the elements like this. And because we want to update all of their inner text to, I believe it was updated item, this should accomplish that now. So let's try it out. 1, 2, 3, click. 1, 2, 3, click. 1, click. It seems to be working fine. Let's take a 10-minute break before I finish this up. Then when we come back, I'll do the last submit button. And what was the last part of this? The styling. I'll add in that as well. So a 10-minute break, then we'll come back and I'll finish up this lab. And then we'll dive into the day 5 assignment, which you haven't seen yet, but I'll still do that one as well. I just want to make sure everyone's having this opportunity to get caught up. That way you're not feeling overwhelmed, and we can use our lab time to get caught up on assignments, as well as go over anything that you may be having a hard time with, or any review that you want to get into before we get into our actual review week. All right, so I'm going to start the 10-minute timer now, and I'll see you in 10 minutes. All right, welcome back, everyone. I'm going to pick right back up where we left off on this assignment. Let's take a look at our functionality first. Let's see where we're at here. We have our button 1. It's able to add new items. Our button 2 can update the items. Our button 3 has no functionality yet. So when we look at the instructions, we want to see if button 1 is clicked, it creates a new item. If button 2 is clicked, it updates an item. And when button 3 is clicked, we want to remove the last li from the list container. So I'll do that the same way that I did these first two, by selecting the element, button 3, and we'll just add that logic in with the remove method that I showed yesterday. So first we'll do buttons at 2. That will select the element for the third button. Add event listener. This is a click listener again. So our first parameter is click. Our second parameter is a function. I'm going to put in my callback function. We'll do the arrow. Okay, so there's my 2 parameters. I'm going to open up my arrow function to multiple lines. And what I want to do here is I'm actually going to do this again. So I'm going to repeat this line of code. So I select all the elements, and then I just want to grab the last element from this list of elements. So easy way to do that is the length of the list of li minus 1, and then I index to that number, and that will be the last element. So what that would look like is list of li index to list of li dot length minus 1. This will give us the last element. This is a little bit weird looking with the square brackets right here. So what I like to do is actually put this into a variable, and we'll say const last item equals list of li length minus 1. And then I can place that in there just to make this a little bit more readable. And then we're just going to use the remove method. I'll show you that real quick in MDN. Just so we remember what that is. And removes the div that matches the ID. So it's pretty straightforward. They selected an element here by ID. They selected div 02. That's this one right here. And they call it on the element, and it removes the item. So pretty straightforward. That's how it works. Let me go back in here. So when I click on this button with this event listener, it's going to invoke this callback function. The callback function is going to select all of my LIs. It's going to find the last item, and then it's going to remove the last item. After this is run, we'll no longer have all of the LIs selected, so this will no longer be relevant. So let's go ahead and test this to make sure it's working correctly. Create some LIs, remove it, remove, create some new ones, add some updated, remove, remove, remove. So this seems to be working correctly. Let's take a look at our next step for this. So when button 3 is clicked, we're removing the last item from the list. So now we're going to part 3, styling. The first one is apply a border and padding to the main container using inline styles. Okay, so we have the main container selected. That's right here. So we can just go ahead and modify that. I'm going to do it at the top above my button selectors here. You can put this wherever you want in your code though. Excuse me. Main container dot style. This is how we do inline styling with JavaScript, is the style attribute. We select attributes with the dot notation. Consider these an object, and every attribute that you can have in HTML is a property within that. And we want to add border equals, and then this is going to be written exactly the way you would write it in CSS. So I could say 1 pixel solid black. I could put these in any order. CSS isn't picky about that. I could say black solid 1 pixel, solid 1 pixel black, whatever order you want to put them in. That should work fine. Let's take a look at it. There it is. And as I'm putting items in there, we can see that that's applying correctly. So that looks good. And padding is the other one we want to add. So let's take a look at that. Main container dot style dot padding equals, we'll do 50 pixels. You can put whatever value you want for yours. Just picking a big number so we can see the difference. And there we go. And you can always inspect this too and check out your box model at the bottom and make sure that I have it selected there. You're seeing the padding being applied there. There's that 50 pixels we added. This is also the border that's being applied as part of the sizing. So this all seems to be working correctly still. Let's see what's next. Create a CSS class called highlight using a style tag. It changes the background color of the elements. When any list li list item in the list container is clicked, toggle the highlight class for that item. Okay, so to do that, I would want to put that when I create the li, that's when I want to create this event listener. If I were to do this outside of here, if I were to say select all of my LIs in global scope, after this script runs once, it's no longer running, so my LIs aren't going to have the event listener. But I can do it as soon as I create the LI, I can add that event listener now. So we'll say li.add event listener. This is a click listener. Requires a callback function as these have. And we just want to change the background color on a click of the li. And to do that, we're going to do it by adding a class. So this will be li dot class list. Sorry, I was drawing a blank there for a second. Add, and the name of the class was called highlight. And I'm getting this from right here. Where'd that go? Toggle the highlight class for that item. Add the class highlight. So that's where this is coming from. So here we're adding the highlight class. And now we just need to add that CSS within our HTML using an internal style sheet. I'm not going to do the external style sheet as a separate file, as the instructions say to use a style element. So we'll create our highlight and we'll give it a background color. And we'll throw blue in here just so we can see it happen. And let's see if this is working correctly. Create our elements, click on our elements, remove our elements, and everything seems to be working fine. Yeah, everything's working good. I feel like they had a good test with that. And one thing to note too is when I select this item, we can see the highlight class was applied. Okay, so we want to attach event listeners to the buttons for the perform the above actions. This is kind of like verification of what we've already done. We wouldn't have been able to do part 2 without part 4 being complete. I should probably just remove part 4 from the instructions and then attach click listeners to each LI to toggle the highlight class. We did that. Event handling, ensure that the page responds to users' actions described above. Implement functionality so that new LI items also have the click event listener attached for the highlight class to toggle. If you were to put your for loop outside, if you were to put your event listener here somewhere else, you may not have had this on the new items that were created. So you want to make sure that this is inside of the event listener. It's a nested event listener. Let me actually like separate this out a little bit. I'll just move this up so that everything that's grouped together we can see there. It doesn't matter what order these are in, as long as they're all here, other than the first one matters. The rest of these, they can be in any order. So we want to make sure again that this event listener is within this event listener. So these are nested. And the reason we're nesting it is because at the time of creation, that's when we want to add the click listener to the LI specifically. If we added it at a later time, it might not function the way we want. We could do this as a function as well. We could say add highlight listener or something like that in a separate function and then invoke the function in here. That's also acceptable. There's a lot of ways to solve this, but that's the main takeaway there is that if you have it inside there, you don't have to do any external looping. One solution I seen yesterday was nesting your buttons, this button 1 inside of button 0. And then you don't need to use a for loop to select all of these because you already have access to your LIs in there. So it was a pretty clever way to do that. I'd never thought or seen that done before. So props to the student that actually nested their button inside of their other button and gained that access to the LIs at a later time. Okay, so this lab looks to be complete. I believe we have, all of the functionalities working. So I'm going to go ahead and ACP this so that it's ready for submission. And I'm going to do that through the source control. And this time, I'm just going to press the commit button. I'm not going to click stage. I'm not going to put a message in here. I'm just going to press commit. And then it's going to want to know, do you want to stage all these do you want to stage all of your changes and commit them directly? I'm going to say yes. I never click always for this because that actually does lead to issues if you accidentally press commit and you didn't want to. So I'm just going to say yes. And then it wants to know, what is my commit message? So I get to write my commit message in this file now where I get a little bit more control over the formatting. And I'm going to say create listener for button 1. Doesn't look great. There we go. Create listener for button 1. And then the details that would relate to that would be it creates new LI on click, create listener for button 2. And these are the kind of commit messages that are really strong. Whenever you put in bullets like this and you're really detailed about what kind of work you did, this is what you'll want to do when you're working in the industry, is be very, very specific, very detailed, and maybe even include screenshots and stuff when you get onto GitHub. Upload screenshots of the before and after changes to whatever changes you made. This one updates text of the LIs. Updates. No, this one removes last item from list. I know I also did the styling. I would want to put that in my message, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to go ahead and commit this. The way you commit through this commit message edit file is just by pressing either close or this check mark here. I usually just close it and it does the put, or it does the commit, and then I can click this to commit, or sorry, to push. And that's it for this one. I'm going to go ahead and close this out. And moving into assignment 5. Was the wrong assignment 5. There we go. Ooh, this one's all formatted funny. Let me fix that. Okay, that looks better. All right, so this one's going to be called JavaScript Week Review. Let's go ahead and create this repo. Select my organization, public, add README file. I remember the organization is just for this demo. It's just so I'm not posting all of these repos over and over and over again in the future on my personal GitHub profile. And I'm going to clone this down. Yep. Clone, shift insert. And we'll see the end of that. And I will do touch index.html and script.js include period. Let's pull this over. Get my proof of life information so that I know that everything is wired up correctly. And we'll put in a use strict followed by a console.log of some random text, just so we can see that it's working. I use different text in each one of these, just so that I know that I'm on the correct file. Okay, everything is wired up. Let's look at our instructions. Excuse me. All right, so in the index.html, we're going to create a form with 2 input fields, name and age, and a submit button. Okay. So we'll have a form. I'm going to delete this action. We're going to have 2 input fields, so I'm going to have 2 labels as well. And what were they again? Name and age. Name, name, and input name, name, label, age, age, input, what am I getting my not getting my extra stuff there. Okay. So there's a label, an input, a label, an input. So we have our 2 fields and we need a submit button. I always forget the button. Just to show you too, another way you can do a submit button is by saying input type submit. And that does the same thing. I think you have to put a value in here or make this not a self closer to get the actual text in there. So I never use that one. It's easier just to make a button. It does create a button when you have it like that. It is a thing that you'll see sometimes. So there we go. We have the required HTML for the beginning. And now in the script, we're going to write code to append the submitted data as a list and an unordered list on the page when the form is submitted. Okay, so we don't have an unordered list. So I'm going to go ahead and create that here. This UL can just live right there. I could also do this using JavaScript. I could say create element UL, select my body, and append this UL to the body. There's not really a need to do that though, because I know it's going to be here. I know it's going to exist, so I might as well just create it now. And we're going to append the submitted data to the unordered list on the page when the form is submitted. Next, we're going to create an array of 5 colors. So it looks like they gave me some color here. So let's go ahead and use that. Okay. Use a for loop to display each color as a separate paragraph on the page. Okay, so that's not in line with the LI. We'll implement a loop. Use the map, keep, and display each number and filter them as a list item. Okay, so we will be using the list items later. This is something separate. So I'm actually going to create another element to latch onto in here for that. And I'm just going to call this, we'll do a div, and we'll give it an ID of, that was data, of message. So I'm going to select that up here. Document.query selector ID of message. And each of these are going to be a paragraph element. So we're going to do a for loop, let I equal 0. If I is less than color.length, I plus plus. And now this is going to be, we're going to need to create a paragraph. So it'd be const p equals document dot create element. Pass in our p, so we're creating this paragraph element. And now we want to change the inner text to be the color. So p dot inner text equals color at I. Let's look at our output. I don't see any output. Did I forget to append it? I did. Message dot append child p. There we go. Each of those is a separate paragraph now. So that's one step done. Implement a while loop that adds. Yes, Ryan, you have a question.
What are we doing with the input from name and age?
That's a good question.
Did it just have us make those forms just because, or?
Yeah, I don't see a use for them. Use map, use for each, demonstrate. Yeah, that's a good point.
Wait. I see it's in the second line right there, the second bullet.
Oh, did I miss it? Write code to append the submitted as a list item. Okay, yep. Thank you for bringing that up. I would have completely missed that. That would have been loss of points on this assignment. So let's go ahead and implement that now. So I have my UL. I'm going to go ahead and select that. Oops, I didn't mean to alt tab there. So it's const UL equals document dot query selector. Pass in the UL. And now we want to make list items every time we click. So we're going to select the button. Actually, no, we're not going to select the button. We're going to select the form because this is inside of a form. So let's use query selector on that. And now on the form, we're going to add an event listener. Does anyone know which event listener I'm going to add? Does anyone remember from when we did the form the other day?
It's a click event listener, right?
That would be if I was putting this on the button, but because I'm putting this on the form, it's actually a different event. It's a submit event. So whenever the form is detected as submitted, that's when this action will occur. Interesting too, Whenever you select a form, you have access to everything inside the form, including the button, the input, the label, everything. So we could put a click event on the button through the selection of the form, but that's not a very common practice. It's more common to just do it on submit. One of the reasons for that is because we need to prevent the default behavior. Whatever logic I put in here right now, notice submit refreshes my page. I don't know if you can see that happening. If you look up top here, every time I click that, it refreshes. So we need to stop that first thing. So I'm going to put my E here for event. E stands for event. E.prevent default. This is a method that will prevent that from refreshing the page. So now I click it and we have no page refresh. So that's the first thing I like to do whenever I'm setting up a form, is stop it from refreshing the page. There might be times where you need it to refresh the page if you're actually doing a real form submission to an API. If that's the case, then obviously don't put that in because you need it to refresh in that case. But in this case, we're good to go. We want to create an LI and append to the UL with the value of, let me actually double check what that said, age and name. Write code to append the submitted form data as a list item. So it'll be one list item and an unordered list on the page when the form is submitted. Okay. So I'm actually going to do that as kind of like a string template literal. What we'll do is create an LI, document dot create element. We're going to create an LI. Remember, we use a string to create it, but the variable is not a string. So we see the little bit of a difference there. And then we want to change the inner text to be the value that's in our current form that's being submitted from our form. So this will be li dot inner text is equal to, and I'm going to use a string template literal and say, we'll do, what were the forms again? I keep forgetting. Name and age. So we'll do name, $, curly bracket. This will be form dot target dot name dot value, and age, $, curly bracket, form dot target. Oh, that changed. Name dot value dot target dot age dot value. And I'm actually going to break these out into separate variables because this is kind of long. So I'll say const name equals, and we'll just grab that and place it here. And then we'll grab the variable and place it there, just to clean this up a little bit. Remember, these are expressions. So anytime you have an expression, it can be assigned to a variable. And anytime you have $ curly brackets, they require an expression. So you can insert variables here just as easy as all of this text. So that just cleans it up a little bit, makes it a little easier to read. See if it works. So we'll say name 22, submit, and cannot read properties, undefined reading value. I believe it's because I have target here. Let me remove that. Let me get a console.log. Of form. Maybe I did need target. Undefined. What do we got going on here? Let's take a look. So here's the form element. we have an ID and a name of name. A little bit of a bug going on here. I see what I did wrong. It's not a bug. It's actually, let me undo. And this shouldn't be form.target. It should be event.target. Because I used the letter E, it'll be E.target. Let's try that again. And again, I don't have any luck. It's console.log e.target.age just to see if this is working. Okay, we did get the element dot value. Oh, but again, I forgot to append it to the page. So this is probably working. ul.append child and then pass in the li. I apologize for that little bit of a hiccup there. And there it is. Name is name, age is 11. Put in my actual name. That seemed to be working fine. The formatting is not the greatest. I could do this. Try something like that. So that kind of works. It looks a little better with it being multi-line like that. The dots up there, I would have to do some CSS to fix that. One thing I want to change though is this is a text input. I want to change this to a number input because age should be a number. So instead of text, this will be number. It just makes a little more sense to me. And there we go. This way if I press letters here, it doesn't do anything. So it has like some built-in validation. That seems to be working fine. So steps 1 through 3 are complete. Use a for loop to display each color as a separate paragraph. We did that. Implement a while loop that adds paragraphs to the page while a counter is less than 5, each paragraph displaying the counter's current value. Okay, so this is going to be a while loop that acts a lot like a for loop. So we'll say let counter equal 0 while counter, from my parentheses, counter is less than, what did I say, 5? Yep. I'm not going to finish that logic just yet. I'm going to put the 5 here in a bit. I don't want to start an infinite loop by accident. Let's go ahead and start putting paragraphs on the page. I believe I have, we'll do this message one. Message.append child. And then we'll actually create the element we're going to put in there now. That will be a paragraph. I'll just copy this one. And the inner text is going to be the value of the counter. So it'll be counter, p dot inner text equals, I'll do a string template literal. We'll say count $ curlies counter. And then after all of this, we want to increment our counter. Otherwise, we'll be in an infinite loop. And we want to append the paragraph to the page. And now I'll put my 5 in there so that I can make this run. And let's take a look. Count 0, count 1, count 2, count 3, count 4. We need to increment this. We're starting at 0. We're doing that by 5. That's all fine. I'm actually going to add 1 to this here. And there we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Our normal counter is starting at 0 and it's going up to 5. We're adding 1 here so that it displays the proper output on the page. So there is our while loop. Does anyone have any questions about the while loop?
Sorry, I was having trouble keeping up with notes. Could you show the code for just a minute?
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so the while loop is done. Notice my counter is outside of my while loop when I first declare it. If I were to put it inside of my while loop, it would create an infinite loop because every time this would iterate, it would reset my counter back to 0. If I were to place it here, that would be an infinite loop because this would run this line of code, this line of code, this line. It would send it to 1. It would go up here and check, yes, it's still less than 5. It'd reset it back to 0. And then it would do all this over again, increment it to 1. It would go back up here, check, yes, it's still less than 5, set it back to 0, and that would run forever. So be careful with that. Make sure your counter is outside of your while loop. I haven't seen anyone disconnect from the call, so I don't think anyone has had any infinite loops that were so bad that it caused a browser to crash, but that can happen. You could actually run out of RAM and your computer becomes unresponsive and it'll actually crash your browser if you let the loop run for too long. All right, let's look at the next step. Create an array with these numbers, 1 through 5, and we will then do something with map. So let's do the array first. I'll create that up here. I'm actually going to move this up. I like to have all my variables at the top of the page. Just keep things organized. So there's my array of 5 numbers. And I know we're going to be mapping over it. And remember, map returns an array. So let's look at that again. So we're having an array here. We declare a variable and we assign it to the value of the original array.map. It takes in a callback function and outputs whatever was returned. It takes in this callback function again as the parameter and returns a new array with each element. Okay. So let's go ahead and use that. Const new nums equals nums.map. Callback function number. I'm not going to put the curly brackets because I need to return these. And when you don't have curly brackets, it's an implicit return. With that, there's actually a trick you can do. If you do have multiple lines of code, but it all evaluates to a single value that can be returned, you can actually use parentheses here and make this multi-line like that. And it'll still do the implicit return. I'm just going to go ahead and do it without the parentheses though. So we want to do, let's see what it said. Use the map method to double each number, the filter method to keep only the even numbers, and the for each method to display each number from the filter operation as a list item. Okay, so that's a lot going on. But each of these are a separate step. So I'm just going to do these one at a time. We're going to start with the map method and we're going to double the number. So number times 2. And this needs to be a list item. So we'll do const li. Has that already been created? Equals document dot create element. And I'm actually going to put this, I'm going to encapsulate this in a function. Call it map method. The reason I'm putting this in a function is so that I can reuse this li variable name over and over and over again for each of these methods. You don't have to do it this way if you don't want to. You could call each of these a different name. I just think this will be easier this way. And after we create the li, we want to output each. So this is actually going to be happening inside of there. I don't know why I would do it like that. Let me double check that. Filter and for each to display each item. Okay, so for each is the only one doing the li. So I actually need to back up. I apologize there. We'll just change this to a for each. And we'll come back to that. We'll leave the li in there. We'll use that later. So we'll just console.log new nums. And there they are. There's my new numbers. Everything's been doubled. So that one is complete. Next is filter. And I believe we have to filter the new nums, which doesn't make sense because these are already all even numbers because we doubled them. Let me see. Use the map method to double each number, the filter method to keep only the even numbers. So I'll do it on the original list just so that we actually get some value out of it. And I was assuming that it wanted me to filter the new nums, but that won't work because they're all even numbers. So let's filter odds from nums. Nums.filter, pass in our callback. This is going to be a number. Put it in our arrow. And we'll do an implicit return. We'll say number divided by 2 with remainder that strictly equals, it does not strictly equal. We're looking for odd numbers. 0. That gives us the odd numbers. Console.log odds. See if that's working correctly. And there they are. And then finally, the for each. I have this inside of a function just so I can keep this li in global scope. So this will be nums dot for each callback function number. And then we will do what to the number? For each to display each number from the filter operation as a list item. So I actually need to not do nums, I need to do odds with the for each. So this would be li dot inner text equals number. This actually needs to go inside of the for each. Otherwise, it will not. We want to recreate a new li every single time this runs. And then we need to take this and append it to our ul. So this will be ul dot append child li. So this is basically a for loop. The for each and the for loop are the same thing, except it only works on arrays. And we're going to be looping over this number, or all of the numbers. For each number that we loop over, we're going to create an li. We're going to set the inner text of that li to the number, and then we're going to append the li to the ul. And now I just need to invoke my function for each method, and everything should work fine. There are the odd numbers from the filter list being displayed as an li. All right, let's see what the next step is. We need to demonstrate the difference between copying primitive and reference types. Show this by creating multiple creating and manipulating variables of each type and displaying the results on the page, such as copy and change array versus number. Okay, so we'll do const my array 1 equals 2, 3. Const my array 2 equals my array 1. My array 1 dot push in the number 5. Actually, we'll push in a string. And then we'll console.log my array 2. So what this is representing is we have this reference type array, and we assigned array 1 to a value of array 2. We modified array 1, and we'll see that represented by console.logging array 2. So anytime array 1 updates, array 2 also updates, because these are the same location in memory. They are the same array. They're not separate arrays as stored in variables. They are the exact same array. So anything I do to this one will happen to this one as well. And there we can see the new value being added, even though that's not the one that I did to push on. It's still updated. I did to push on array 1. I console.logged array 2, and we still see the new value was added. So there is the demonstration of the first one. And let's do a primitive type now and show what the behavior of that looks like. So const, we have to actually use let for this because we're going to try to reassign this. My num1 equals 5. Let my num2 equal my num1. My num1 equals 10. Console.log my num2. And I would expect my num2 to be 5. And there I get 5. And that's because this is a primitive type. So when I'm assigning my num2 at the time of assignment, my num1 is equal to 5. And I reassign my num1 to 10, but I never reassign the value of my num2. And because it's a primitive, the primitive is stored within the variable and not its location in memory as the arrays were. So there's my demonstration of a reference type manipulation, and here's my demonstration of a primitive type manipulation, or I should say an attempted primitive type manipulation, because my num1 did not update my num2, even though I assigned my num2 to be my num1. It's because primitive types don't behave that way. Does anyone have any questions about primitive versus reference types? Any questions at all about JavaScript? That's the entire assignment. So if you do have questions, this is a great time for them. I'm going to ACP this. I'll use the source control again. And I'm going to add all of these at once by clicking this plus sign. And then I'm going to say complete assignment 5. Commit, push, done. What questions do you have about JavaScript? Is there any part of this that is confusing? Anything you want me to go over? Anything you want clarification on? Anything you're stuck on? Any bugs you might have run into? Maybe confusion with methods? Maybe you want to know about other methods? Anything at all? If there's no questions, I'm going to end the recording. Hopefully I'll be able to upload this video tonight. That way we have reference earlier on this than normal.